Okay, welcome back to Ben and Matt's Marvellous Journey. We are close to the end of the road. It's episode 19. We've covered all of the currently released films at the time of this recording. Infinity War will be out by the time you hear this, but we are recording this before then, and our Infinity War review will drop in a couple of days. This 19th episode, we are going to be talking about just sort of the MCU over the last 10 years and just giving a little retrospect, some of our favourite memories, and some fun lists, resolving our all Marvel list, revealing our combined rankings, all this fun stuff. I cannot do it alone though. My name is Matt Waters. I'm joined by Ben Phillips. Ben, how are you? How is the gin soaking into your system?
The gin was a mistake because I got hay fever as well. So it's just exacerbated everything. So I apologise if I sound a bit stuffed up. I have taken antihistamines to sound not bad.
Okay, well, this only bodes well for what we're about to try and do, because this is probably going to be a little bit more freeform. We're normally, moving through the plot of a movie, or we've got very clear themes, or we've got a cast list to run down. This is just going to be kind of a freeballing conversation about the MCU, so buckle up. We are in the middle of our big 2-week MCU extravaganza. If you are sick of Marvel movies, do not worry. It's almost over for several months. So yeah, there's lots of fun lists, there's articles, check it all out on intotherealworld.com, 2 E's in real. And then at the end of our Infinity War review, we will reveal Ben and I's plans for the future. And they are fun indeed. But so the MCU, that wasn't terminology that existed 10 years ago. And then along came Iron Man 1, and along came all these other movies, and here we are now, where it's the biggest thing on the planet. And as I've documented in our Iron Man 1 podcast, I wasn't really in from day one. I was aware there are some superhero movies coming out, but certainly for a lot of people, they would have known that, Marvel had this plan. They're like, oh, we're going to do these movies, and then we hope to do Avengers. And the thing at the time was everyone was kind of thinking, this isn't going to work. And I've heard it said by so many of the stars of the MCU, and it sounds just corny as hell, but they're completely right. Nothing had been done like the Avengers, where there's sort of, here are all these individual movies leading to one big team-up movie. And it very easily could have just blown up completely in their faces, and they could have just had several flops leading to a movie that doesn't have enough star power and all of this. And to see it go from there and work and completely influence the entire film industry and become the hottest game in town. Infinity War on track to be one of the biggest movies ever. Black Panther, financially one of the biggest movies ever. So many Marvel movies in these sort of top 10 all time, or top 20, whatever, of all time. And they're only set to continue on the rise after this with all these unannounced movies. So I don't know, it's just been a crazy, crazy thing to witness, and I kind of wish that I had been in from day one rather than sort of around the time of Iron Man 2 about to come out. I'd sort of cottoned on, hey, there's a lot of these comic book movies coming out. That's kind of cool. But you, I trust, were far more clued up from day one.
Yeah, I've seen every single one of these movies in a cinema. It's super weird to think back on 2008 as being the start of all this, because 2008 wasn't really the year of Iron Man and Incredible Hulk. It was the year of The Dark Knight, and all anyone was really talking about was Heath Ledger and how fucking good he was. And obviously Nick Fury and Samuel L. Jackson was mentioned, but this was more or less all about The Dark Knight. Or at least that's my memory of it. And obviously since then it's kind of grown and grown and grown and grown into this massive juggernaut. But I mean, I'm just trying to think when did I first hear the phrase Marvel Cinematic Universe? Because
that's a difficult one for me to pin down as well. I don't know if they ever meant for it to become this huge ubiquitous thing. I know that, we'll talk about some of these other cinematic universes that have come, but obviously DC, allegedly their DCEU, that was a joke that got taken seriously. So yeah, I don't know when that first came about, but that's not a term I'd ever heard before, really, a cinematic universe.
Yeah, I don't know if it's some article on the internet coined it, or if it's something that Feige said, or something that someone said, but you look at the 2 movies that come out that year, and so Iron Man obviously ends with the post-credit scene with Samuel L. Jackson and Nick Fury, and it was a big moment, and all the nerds in the audience are going, oh my god, they mentioned the Avengers, and oh, imagine if this goes crazy. And then I think they actually filmed the Incredible Hulk cameo with Downey Jr.,
Yeah.
Like, I think that was actually shot like after Iron Man, but before Incredible Hulk came out, in the month or whatever it was that was. I mean, I might be completely wrong at that point.
Well, they'd done that before. Like, they filmed the shawarma scene the week between it coming out internationally and domestically, and a whole bunch
and then
of
obviously
others.
they took that year off in between, and then ever since 2010, there's been one of these films a year. Like, there's always a film in May. No matter what happens, there will be a Marvel movie in May to go see.
Yeah, those early films, like, I look at Phase 1 and I see a lot of, it's the start of all of this. And we obviously love all these movies. Like, we've done all these episodes on them, and you'll hear an hour of conversation about each and every one of them, except a couple that went less than an hour. But it's sort of categorized by all these origin movies, and they establish this kind of the Marvel formula, and they're better than you'd expect them to be. But if you look back at those and then you look at some of the quality that is coming out in Phase 3, and it's not night and day, but you can kind of see how far they've come. Like, they had some shaky sort of starts out of the gate with Iron Man didn't have a script. Obviously, we've made our thoughts known about the third act of that movie. Incredible Hulk, not amazing. It was actually pretty well reviewed at the time. But, its legacy is not great. And I feel Captain America 1, its legacy has grown over time. I feel at the time people weren't, giving much of a shit about it. And I don't think any of those Phase 1 movies are really that bad. People obviously have a lot of hate about Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2, but I don't know, I just sort of think of them all just so young and trying all this new stuff.
I definitely think there's less variance between the best and the worst of Phase 1, apart from the Avengers. They're all, I'd give them between a 6 and an 8 out of 10. That's kind of what we're looking at. Like, a variance in score is about 1 star, 2 points kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then Avengers is a different league in terms of what it does.
Yeah.
But yeah, Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, First Avenger, they all have very low aims, and they all pretty much achieve what they're going for. I think Hulk's the only one that doesn't fully achieve what it hopes to do.
Yeah. None of them had enormous budgets, and they weren't expecting the world. There are definitely films that, studios have very specific monetary ideas in mind, and you're not getting a sequel unless you hit this mark, or you don't get at least this level of critical reception. But Marvel, I don't think they were trying to do too much too fast. I think they were just trying to mind their business a little bit and just sort of put the properties that they thought were the strongest sort of starting blocks out there. And Iron Man was a B player at best in comics. Captain America, while very, very famous, not very well regarded outside of America, really. Kind of a dorky character. Hulk, obviously, very, very famous. But, to take these names and make something of them so that they can build an Avengers team out of them was quite something, I thought. And, Disney, obviously, buying Marvel. Did they buy the entirety of Marvel all at once, or was it they bought the comic side of it, and then they got the rights to the films a little bit later?
They bought Marvel in 2009, so obviously, just as some of these deals were going in, and obviously the deal with Paramount, stuck around for a few years. But yeah, the deal to buy Marvel came with the comic side, it came with the film side and everything like that. So they bought everything in one fell swoop, but we didn't really start seeing fruit of it until kind of 2012 when Avengers came out.
Yeah.
I am intrigued. Obviously, this is the first time we've seen a cinematic universe of this kind of description. And a lot of the actors talk about how they didn't think it was going to succeed in the way that it does. Because obviously, this is such a monster runaway success. I wonder if that's part of why they managed to get such... I don't want to say good deals, because I do think some of the deals they signed at the very beginning were very bad for some of the actors, but
Hemsworth and Evans make less than $1 million between them for the Avengers.
They
get Samuel L. Jackson on a steal for 9 films or something.
Yeah, that's the thing. They sign these massive contracts, and I'm sure back in 2007 when Robert Downey Jr. signs the 6-film contract or whatever he signs, he's sat there going "Oh, I'll make 2 of these and make an awful lot of money," and laugh his way to the bank. And now it's 2018, 10 years later, he's made God knows how many movies and is probably the richest or the most paid actor in all of Hollywood. These deals are mental that they got to sign them, and I feel the only reason they managed to sign them was that there was no precedence for this to happen.
Downey now, huge star, but massive risk. We covered this in Iron Man, but they were probably able to get him for Iron Man 1 for very little money at all. And Hemsworth, relatively unknown. Evans, people recognise his face, but not really a star. And Ed Norton, probably a little bit pricey, but he was out of there.
But I mean, I feel like Ed Norton is the weird one of this. Like, I feel Ed Norton has headlined movies that people have probably seen. Like, he's in Fight Club. Like, it's not the biggest movie of all time, but like, he's gone toe to toe with Brad Pitt. He's in American History X. The only person that I feel like you could probably tell would have been a star without this happening is Johansson.
I feel she already was kind of a star.
You look at the people they had, like Evans and Hemsworth probably wouldn't be Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth if they didn't get Cap and Thor, whereas Scarlett Johansson probably would still get Lucy, and she probably would still get like all these other movies that she's been doing at the same time. Like, she's the one who's got a career really outside of the MCU.
Yeah.
And that's mostly because they haven't given her a solo movie.
Yeah. You mentioned how these actors, said all this. The one that comes to mind, Chris Hemsworth, said he only really realised this was all working when they were all on set for the Avengers. And, Joss Whedon coming in and making that movie. I feel those Phase 1 films before Avengers were, like, cute. They were sort of, like, for the nerds in a way. And, like, some people found them just generally a bit of light-hearted fun as well. But Avengers managed to be authentic Marvel and comic booky, and like, here's all this shared continuity, and here are all these Easter eggs and fun little playing off each other, and we're making stars of all these people in this massive blockbuster. I feel Whedon I don't want to say Whedon took the MCU to that next level, but he kind of did. Like, the Avengers was such a fucking smash hit.
I mean, like, there's a lot of things going on there. Like, I think Jon Favreau could have made a really good Avengers movie, but I do think that getting Joss Whedon at that point in his career where he's just coming off Dollhouse, has a history of writing this kind of thing. It's such a lightning a bottle kind of moment. You have all these actors coming together. You have this person who gets the nerdy stuff, but also has experience writing ensembles, who is given more or less free reign within a structure, and something special came out. That Act 3 is a victory lap. Like, the movie is pretty much over by the time you're 2 hours in, and the final 30 minutes are just like, we got CGI budget left to use. Let's just do all the money shots that people have been dreaming about since 1963 when these characters debuted in the comic book.
But it really stuck the landing is the thing, I think, because if they'd said, we're going to do Iron Man, Thor, Incredible Hulk, Cap, and then we're going to do Avengers, people, I'm sure, laughed, and they had every right to. But even after those movies did come out and were probably better than most people expected, it still was a massive question mark if they could pull off Avengers, and they did. And that it's potentially the best movie they've made, potentially the best script that was written for them, all this, it was very important. And like, it was such a massive smash hit. Like, they stuck the landing. And
like, so much had to go right for this movie, and the fact that it all did is incredible. Like, I've heard people say, Act 1's boring and all the rest of it, but
Act 1 might be my favourite act of the Avengers. I don't know. I mean, I like all those little introducing them moment. Anyway.
but it's one of those things where everything had to go right, and everything did, and any one of the things could have gone badly. Like, one of the people they hired could have been a complete diva and, like, made an ass of themselves on set.
Well, Downey almost did. He wanted to position himself as the star. He wanted to be the first character to be seen, and then Joss sort of humoured him, but then talked him out of it. So they did well to curb that, and I think he did well to recognise, okay, this isn't going to be me and some schmoes. Like, this is going to be a team thing, and like, they've always positioned him front and centre. Downey is the one they trot out. He's like their press darling and all of this. But I think he has recognised that this wouldn't work with just him, and that they are making other stars along the way.
Yeah. And then we move into Phase 2, which is
up and down.
The thing is, like, when I look at Phase 2, I see 3 of my favourite MCU movies here.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of them are in my, like, top 3, but Iron Man 3, Winter Soldier, and Guardians of the Galaxy are 3 of my favourite superhero movies. They're probably 3 of the defining superhero movies. I know there's an awful lot of people who would probably go to bat for Winter Soldier as being the best superhero movie.
I feel that one lasted until I don't know, sometime around Civil War or something like that.
I still see people
Really?
I saw a March Madness bracket which ended with what are the best superhero movies, and I think it was either Dark Knight or Winter Soldier.
Okay.
and it's like there's a level of support for this movie that I understand, but also I'm hesitant to go all in on. Like, I can see why someone would love Winter Soldier to the level of they think it's a spy movie, but it's a superhero movie. But I do think that there are flaws that are preeminent in Phase 2 are in all of the movies that I think are really good.
The difficult, the endings, the villains, the treatment of women, the behind the scenes controversies. So that's in almost every one of the Phase 2 movies.
Yeah, but again, Iron Man 3 is incredible, regardless of what you may have heard on tangentially related podcasts to this.
Yes.
Winter Soldier is the second best Captain America movie, which is saying an awful lot. Guardians of the Galaxy is the freaking Guardians of the Galaxy. I think that's the one movie that you can point to and say, as a statement, that means more to the MCU than almost anything else. If we are going for which movies have the most mainstream appeal of the MCU, it's Avengers and it's Guardians of the Galaxy. Those are the two that broke out of the fairly insular shell of superhero movies. And that's not to say that these superhero movies don't make a lot of money, but you see people in the street and knowing now who Groot and Rocket are. You see people in the street who get this thing that was nerdy and obscure 8 years ago. Yeah. That even someone who spent every Wednesday in a comic book shop probably wouldn't be able to tell you who Gamora is.
I feel Phase 2 was a lot of adjusting to this new identity they had, where, I mentioned that they were kind of keeping to themselves and just trying to dip a toe and take baby steps with these movies, slow and steady. Avengers comes out, makes all the fucking money in the world. Disney have bought them for a lot of money. I still think it's a steal how much they got for the amount they paid, but never mind. There's now this expectation, and you see the frequency of the movies start to increase, and the amount of time that these people have to make them seems to decrease. And you start to get these directors dropping out and actors starting to give less flattering comments about them, and as a result they also take a couple of risks. Guardians of the Galaxy, definitely a risk, and they adjust their strategy of who they're hiring. They bring in the Russos, they start going to TV people, and that sort of steadies the ship for them, that 1-2 punch of finding good trustworthy TV people and having a massive risk that massively worked and bucked the trend in a way. I mean, I talk about all this dark time. You and I are kind of alone. Well, we're not alone, but we're on Iron Man 3 as Good Island, surrounded by sharks who mistakenly think it's bad. And then, a lot of people really don't like Thor: The Dark World. But so that wasn't, in a lot of people's mind, that was a bad year following what was a great year. And then you have Winter Soldier and Guardians, and that fixes it for a lot of people. But then Age of Ultron, we've said how messy it is. It made a fuck ton of money, but I feel a lot of people sort of throw it under the bus a little bit, and then
I feel like to use another movie franchise that are probably quite comparable to this at this point. Age of Ultron is the Last Jedi to Avengers Force Awakens.
Okay.
But I also think Last Jedi succeeds a lot more than Age of Ultron does. But I do think that audience reaction to those two movies is probably quite similar in that they are both very messy movies, but they both made a shit ton of money because people are going to see them because there's a brand name attached to it at this point. And we're going to see that with Infinity War. Even if Infinity War turns out to be the biggest pile of dog shit in the world, it's going to make $1 billion. There's no way it can't. We'll only know whether or not it's bad until Avengers 4 doesn't make $1 billion. That's when we know something has gone wrong.
Sure.
But this movie is predestined to make that amount of money. But it's interesting that we talk about risks. I do think, even in Phase 1, there are risks. I don't think they're as risky as the Phase 2 risks.
Well, I feel the entirety of Phase 1 is a risk in itself.
Yes, but Iron Man's a massive risk. Thor going hey, we've had these 3 very science-based movies, and now we're going to say there's aliens and magic and space. And, that was a risk. And it was one they had to overcome, and then Avengers was a massive risk. And then, I don't think Thor is as big a risk as Guardians of the Galaxy is.
No.
But I can definitely see the stepping stone of you have to have your Thor before you give them Guardians of the Galaxy. You have to set your audience up in some way to get them ready for what you're going to do.
Thor and Guardians have always been somewhat linked for me.
I mean, it's probably the smartest thing that Thor: The Dark World does is it starts to explicitly set up Guardians of the Galaxy. That post-credit scene with the Collector is it gets you into the tone of that world, and you get to see how it goes on. I don't think Thor: The Dark World is a great movie, but I was excited for Guardians of the Galaxy after getting to see the set of Guardians of the Galaxy that they used in Thor: The Dark World.
Yeah. I feel Phase 2 is where the trailers started to become a huge thing. The Dark World trailer was well received, even if the final movie wasn't. The Age of Ultron trailer broke the internet. Guardians, the trailer did really well. And Phase 2 is also where, for the struggles they were having, because we don't want to just make this all sunshine and rainbows like they did. Joss Whedon did burn out, Edgar Wright dropped out, Patty Jenkins dropped out, Natalie Portman and Hugo Weaving and Terrence Howard and Ed Norton were all... Well, Ed Norton sort of bounced earlier than this, and I guess Terrence Howard did too. But, they were losing these actors and these directors as well, so all this was happening. But on the flip side, Phase 2 is where you start to see copycats of the MCU and the rise of the cinematic universe and all this kind of thing, where, Phase 1, everyone's like, yeah, good luck with that. Then, suddenly, Universal want to do a monster movie universe, and they want to be a Transformers cinematic universe, and the DCEU, obviously. I feel that they brought forward how soon they were doing Justice League by several years. Like, they were like, yeah, we're going to do Batman, we're going to do Flash, we're going to do Green Lantern, we're going to, And then it's suddenly like, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Justice League? Oh, Wonder Woman. But, I feel they really sped up, and I think that their attempts to copy the MCU's game plan, but sort of sprint to the finish a little bit more, have been a massive detriment. And also they've had, for better or worse, they've had one creative vision, and I think that's a creative vision that doesn't jive quite as well as some of the Marvel ones, because Whedon obviously had creative control of Phase 2, and Favreau was informing a lot of Phase 1 and stuff. But I think Marvel smartly have... I think it's more Kevin Feige, and like he's willing to tap creatives that work well with them. Obviously, there have been some clashes, like Edgar Wright didn't work out, but they found writers that they really trust, like Marcus and McFeely have become their go-to guys. Eric Pearson seems to be a guy that they really, really trust a lot. And they've built this team, and they also, they went through the difficult early process and they got to where they did, whereas I feel it's a thing of when you say we're making a universe, it immediately doesn't sit well with the audience. It's like when you announce there's going to be 5 Fantastic Beast films, I immediately go, ugh, don't do that. Like, say that internally, but only tell me you're doing one with potentially more than one coming after that. But it's that thing of like, I think DC calling their shot like that and Universal calling their shot, it just makes it not work for me. It sort of makes it less charming and more... I become more cynical that you're doing this for monetary reasons.
Marvel, obviously, like, they said that they wanted to do it, and they probably were cockier than you probably wanted them to be. But you have to remember that after Iron Man, Incredible Hulk was probably already in production, was not intent, and they just stuck a scene at the end of it to, like, kind of tie it in. Then there's 2 years until you get Iron Man 2, and then... at some point in the middle there, they're just like, we'll try Thor and Captain America. And I'm sure if one of them hadn't worked out, they'd have pulled the plug in Avengers in a heartbeat. Like, if they were on set of Thor and they were just like, this Chris Hemsworth guy isn't really working, they wouldn't have done Avengers. But they did, and it worked. And they were. And
they definitely protected Hemsworth because they surrounded him with actors that were more experienced.
Yeah, exactly. And I like to think that DC didn't go in with Man of Steel and go... in 3 movies' time, we're going to be at Justice League. Yeah.
I feel they'd come off the Dark Knight trilogy, and then they were like desperate to get Superman back in gear, and they were like, right, we'll sort of... because Nolan was a consultant on Man of Steel, and I feel Man of Steel was just an isolated thing, and then they tried to use that as the starting point, and I don't think it was an ideal starting point for their cinematic universe.
As boring as Marvel was with their director picks in Phase 1, because... Jon Favreau, Louis Leterrier, Kenneth Branagh, Joe Johnston are not exciting directors, to say the least. Joe Johnston, director of Jurassic Park 3, is not... yes, he did The Rocketeer, but he also did Jurassic Park 3, and we have to remember this. Louis Leterrier did like Wrath of the Titans, or Clash of the Titans even, and the Transporter movies. Like, he isn't an exciting... director.
Favreau did Elf, and most people don't even know he did Elf.
Yeah. DC went all in on Zack Snyder. And Zack Snyder's a very interesting visual director who loves comic books. but I think he loves comic books for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I also think David Goyer loves comic books for the wrong reasons, but
yeah.
I don't want to like completely bash DC, like that's not what I'm about, but just there's no way you can avoid this direct comparison where we've got one shared universe thing that really, really worked out, and the other that is just a public punching bag.
I mean, I think it doesn't help that Warner Brothers owned DC before Disney owned Marvel. Warner Brothers were coming off of two of the most successful comic movies of all time, with Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises. Batman Begins made money, but like it didn't do Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises money.
Might be the best one in the trilogy, though, if you go and listen to Tape Crusaders.
And obviously, like that was about a year before Man of Steel came out. They've also just come off the fact that they've lost George Miller's Justice League Mortal because of tax reasons and all these kind of other things. Yeah. So they're looking to do something. And all they're seeing is, for the last 5 years, Marvel have been putting out hit after hit after hit after hit based on characters who are fundamentally less interesting than their characters are, or at least to the public eye are less interesting.
Yeah.
And so DC go, we want that Avengers money, because obviously the summer that Dark Knight Rises come out, Avengers coming out at the same time, and they want that, which is why you get this weird move of them doing Man of Steel followed by Justice League .5, followed by Guardians of the Galaxy, Suicide Squad, and then finally they make a movie people actually want with Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
Like that's the weirdness of this thing, is like, rather than starting with movies and getting people who are passionate for the projects and the characters and actually like building them to people want them to be, they just went, look what Marvel's doing, we want to do that, but without the years and years of preparation.
I like to say they haven't earned it, they just want to jump to the end. But
it took 7 years for Marvel to go from Iron Man to Guardians of the Galaxy. Within 2 years of Man of Steel, there's Suicide Squad.
I feel Phase 2 was where I started to hear this, and I've heard it a bit less recently, but this concept of the superhero fad, that people are convinced this is just a fad. It's a phase, it's all going to go away tomorrow, the superhero bubble will burst, I'm sick of all these comic book movies, blah, 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 blah.
I think it was definitely more prominent when you have Marvel doing less than good movies, kind of like every other movie, Sony doing their thing badly, Fox doing their thing badly, DC doing their thing badly, and so you've got three companies being actively not good at the superhero movie thing. You've got one company who isn't at the top of their game, but is still like, and we say they're not at the top of their game, but they're not releasing the runaway hits that like Avengers are. Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy were massive hits, but Thor: The Dark World was definitely more muted. Like, it made more money than Thor, but no one was running home afterwards and like going like, I want to go to Asgard and team up with Thor and blah blah blah. Like, the thing people were talking about was like, wasn't it cool when Chris Evans showed up for a scene in Dark World?
It was, by the way, it was super cool.
But yeah, it's in the superhero world, you've got three companies shitting the bed, one company keeping them aloft, but at that point you've got everyone kind of going like, they can't keep this up. Like, at some point a studio is going to release a bad movie, and the shocking thing is we're 18 movies in. I don't think they have. There are some movies that I am far less excited about than others, but there isn't an out-and-out bad movie. Like, the bad stuff you hear about the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point is all on the TV side.
Yeah.
Like, that is the only place that there have been out-and-out failures for these guys, and that's out of Kevin Feige's remit. And I think it speaks a lot that like Disney probably is doing very milquetoast, very run-of-the-mill, like, they're taking risks, but they're not taking like huge gambles. Like, it's risky that Guardians of the Galaxy might not work because people don't know these characters, but the tone of it, the style of it are all very much like engineered to appeal to people. It's not like Captain America 2 ended up being like, and Punisher shows up and murders everyone and there's blood and gore everywhere and stuff like that. That's a risk that I don't think Disney would make because they're very smart and business savvy. But it's a very manufactured safeness that is risky at the same time, and it's weird to kind of like try and summarize that. But
I just also think it's just like a cultural backlash thing. Whenever something is the current hotness, some people are just like not into it. Like, I have friends who don't give a shit about comic book movies, and I'm sure they're sick of it. But if you look at the way the movie business is right now, it's a whole bunch of reboots, it's a whole bunch of low budget horror movies that become runaway hits, and it's superheroes, and it's Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, I think the conversation changes the day that Marvel puts out a bad movie.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there
have been superhero movies way before this. Like, I know that they are in much greater frequency. But, I mean, there have been superhero movies since 1966, like major ones.
I mean, I do think the superhero movie almost died for a couple of years in the mid-2000s. Well, like X-Men The Last Stand and Spider-Man 3, I feel like they sucked a lot of energy out of the room. And it took 2008 with Iron Man and Dark Knight to kind of get people back up into superhero movies. Like, without that 1-2 punch, I don't think we're at the point where we are now. I think, like, if those movies hadn't come out and the next superhero movie after Spider-Man 3 was X-Men Origins Wolverine,
or Watchmen,
I don't know what we're staring at right now, but
the
I don't
Losers,
know what we're staring
Jonah Hex, Will Arnett's Jonah Hex,
but we're definitely not staring at a world in which Marvel are releasing 3 movies a year and are probably going to make. I mean, 2 of them are going to make $1 billion.
I also think it's not Marvel's fault that other people are trying to copy their thing and aren't doing it well. Like, if people are complaining about all these superhero movies and all these cinematic universes and they're sick of all this terminology, it's like, sure, but they're doing everything well, so rip on everyone else. It's not their... You can't hate on someone for being successful and being copied badly.
Speaking of people doing things well...
Yes, Phase 3, the undisputed best phase. I feel they've adjusted to those growing pains of Phase 2. They've made some mistakes they've learned from. They have heard these criticisms loud and clear about villains and third acts and everything like this. And Phase 3, everything just fired on all cylinders. Is firing on all cylinders. I learned hours ago that Phase 3 is continuing on. So I'm a really good fanboy in that I didn't know it doesn't end with Infinity War.
Oh yeah, there's 3 more movies after Infinity War in Phase 3.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is where just everything went really, really, really well for them. If you look at Ragnarok compared to the first 2 Thor movies, massively more successful. Civil War, really, really successful. Black Panther, a fucking monster. There's another Guardians, and Guardians is now... It goes from the risky thing that was surprisingly good to Guardians is one of the biggest things on the planet. They get Spider-Man back. That's fucking huge as well. And all of this stuff, and like even Doctor Strange, which is clearly the weakest movie in Phase 3, is somewhat reminiscent of these earlier films. It sort of has corrected, as much as it can, a lot of the trappings of those origin movies that were coming out before.
Yeah, I feel like Phase 3, the criticisms can still stand. There is a template for a Marvel movie, and that isn't going to end. You can't disagree that these movies are all structurally very similar. They're just getting better at disguising it. Or, like, you know the structure's the same, but you're going in to see the characters. Like, we're basically now at a point where these are TV episodes. Yeah. But they're massive budget TV episodes. That's probably the smartest thing that the MCU has learned, is that every one of these things is standalone, and yes, they build up to a bigger whole, but people aren't going to them to see the cool special effects or stuff like that. They're here to see characters that we've now known and loved for 10 years.
Yeah.
Civil War works because these are characters that we've seen across, at that point, 7 movies, coming together and having a fight. And to use an actual TV term, like, Civil War as season premiere to a TV show is really good, even if we haven't spent time with any of the characters from Civil War in the 2 years since then, really.
That's true.
Spider-Man and Black Panther have come back, but, like, we have not seen Tony or Cap really in the context of Civil War since 2016.
Avengers is the proof of concept that, we can have movies leading into each other. Civil War is the proof of concept that it can be so continuity heavy, because Avengers at least gives you a sort of a crash course in who everyone is if you haven't seen all the movies. And I hadn't seen all the movies. That was my first experience with Thor. So, and that was, it made me want to go and watch Thor. But even, people in my position, like, the movie opens with his 4 or 5 minutes of each character. Civil War is like, we sure hope you've seen everything, because we're going to be paying off some stories that have been going on for several years now.
Oh yeah, I've got a friend who genuinely didn't like Civil War because he hadn't seen a Marvel movie since Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
And so he's just like, who's Vision?
Who is Vision is a good question. That you don't hear a lot of that says how monstrous Marvel is, because everyone sees all of them. Like, people that don't outwardly give too much of a shit, that just sort of go to them, enjoy them, and then move on with their lives, unlike us weirdos who just talk about them and write about them forever.
So I'm intrigued. So where do you stand on that front? Like, do you think these movies should stand alone, or do you think that Marvel has grown into such a bigger, different entity that they actually can treat this as you've seen the 17 movie or the 18 movies that are preceding Infinity War, and you will understand that there are things that you'll get more context for or more enjoyment from if you've seen the other movies.
I think, to use a weird analogy, like, I remember when animated films with celebrity casts like Shrek, etc., I feel when they started to really blow up, they started talking about how these are ostensibly for kids, but there are things in here that are for adults as well, so that they're having a good time when they get taken to go see them. I feel it's kind of a similar thing where they have to toe this line where if you are some person who has just chosen to see a random film, hasn't seen anything that comes before it, they generally do a good job of holding your hand through it. But then there are these really niche references that are there for I hate this term, but the fanboys. Like, when I go see them with people, I often turn and I'm like, oh, this thing from... And they don't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about. But that was good. That was a happy moment for me, you know, and that I get probably one of those every single movie. It's a difficult balance. You do have to walk it. I don't think you can ever assume, and I don't think you ever should assume, that someone has seen everything that's come before. However, like, if you look at something like television, you don't write your series finale assuming it's the first episode someone's seen. Although I feel I've seen dueling schools of thought about all of this, where I think Dan Harmon kind of feels that every episode is the start of a brand new story in some ways. And
you see it in comic books where there are people saying, like, if you pick up a random comic book and you don't want to find out what happens next, no matter if you're joining the story three parts in or the first issue of a new run, if you don't want to read the next issue, then they've done something wrong. And I think that's the important thing of this, is like, if you go into these movies and you don't want to find out more or see the next installment of it, then they've done something wrong in terms of your excitement. I'm sure there are people who went to see Black Panther and they're perfectly happy to not go see another movie until Black Panther 2 comes out, because Black Panther was a movie that spoke to them, and that's completely fine and and valid as an opinion. But you can see now how heavily they're leaning on Black Panther in the promos for Infinity War, and they're obviously trying to go for that crowd who, like, maybe their first MCU movie was Black Panther, and they'll be like, hey,
that definitely exists. You talk about this, like, wanting to see more and this kind of thing. How I do want to kind of talk about the impact that the Marvel film business has had on Marvel Comics, because I feel, as a person who gave themselves a crash course in comics sometime around the Avengers, just before maybe, I feel DC historically were the hotness. Marvel kind of took it from them. It went back to DC, and then Marvel were really, really good around the time the MCU was happening. But as the MCU has continued, Marvel's gone down a bit, whereas DC has had this, well, rebirth and has been kicking their ass since then. I mean, you are far more of an expert in the comics industry than me, but I personally feel anecdotally that the success of the MCU has led to a detriment in the Marvel Comics. They've clearly made massive adjustments to try and accommodate this enormous new audience to all these characters. Like, Tony is drawn to look like Robert Downey Jr. Star-Lord, while he doesn't look like Chris Pratt, he looks more like Chris Pratt, and he certainly talks like Chris Pratt, and all this kind of stuff. And there's been all these, you know, new number ones and all this, trying to incorporate the MCU into it. And I don't know, I did want to vaguely touch on this.
It's a weird one. In the mid-2000s, Marvel and DC are both operating at all cylinders. Like, I think they're both... DC has got some of their greatest runs of all time. You've got Marvel having some of their greatest runs of all time. And then they both hit this weird roadblock where movies are happening and they're not getting more readers. And so they both go through these massive line-wide reboots to get new readers, to try and get some of these movie readers. And I think DC's was far more cynical and far less successful than Marvel's was, because Marvel basically said, hey, we know we've got a good team of writers and artists, and we're just going to shuffle everyone around. And they do little bits and pieces to, like, copy the movies. They do stuff like Nick Fury is now black in the main Marvel universe rather than the Ultimate Universe, and he's got a sidekick called Cheese, who we reveal is Coulson. And you see things like Loki becomes more like Tom Hiddleston when Thor: The Dark World comes out, and like all these little pieces that they do with characters. And they keep rebooting and they keep rebooting and they keep rebooting because they want to try and get this elusive movies audience. And you hear stories from comic book shops that, like, they go to movie theaters and they hand out, hey, show us the ticket from this movie and we'll give you a free comic book, and no one comes in with a movie ticket.
We worked in a place where you prominently display very cultivated lists of graphic novels that are tangentially related to whatever the big movie is. Not just where we work, but just every place that sells comic books, I feel they have a curated, here are the ones that are in the movies area.
But they don't sell. Like I asked on Twitter like a few months ago, and I was just like, "You watch these movies. Why don't you read the comic books? Like, what about it is it that like scares you off?" And it's kind of like a mixture of price. It's a mixture of the fact that these characters have been going since the 1960s. It's the fact that like comic books are fucking confusing.
They are. For all the attempts to start afresh and like make it an easy jumping on point, and I feel every goddamn writer or series says, "Oh, this is a great jumping on point." Having been a person that has jumped on a lot of these jumping on points, literally for the first time, some of them are not as new reader friendly as they like to talk about, and there is a lot of assumed knowledge and continuity, and you do get a bit lost. And it is, of course, a very expensive hobby, and you know, comic book movies come out every few months, at one point every few years. That's an easy investment. Whereas, you know, oh, well, you got to read this every 2 weeks, every month, you know, forever, for the rest of time. And, like, it will go through lulls. Inevitably, there are almost no comic books where, like, every goddamn issue is a banger.
Yeah, and now you've got this weird point where, like, obviously DC started to improve around the time that the movie started to fail.
Yeah, and that's a weird paradox where they've sort of swapped positions because of their movie businesses.
But Marvel did the weird thing of, like, they were riding on the high, and then they started to replace all their characters with not the versions from the movies.
Yes, and that... Well, I guess that makes sense then. If they're trying to make it more like the movies and it isn't actually translating to sales, do the opposite. But then, you know, you look and you've got Sam Wilson as Cap and a woman as like, Thor.
Jason Aaron's Jane Foster Thor run is phenomenal.
Wonderful.
And like I wouldn't, but I think the issue Marvel had was that they did too much all at once, and I don't begrudge them for having Riri Williams as Iron Man, or Sam Wilson as Captain America, or Jane Foster as Thor. I don't begrudge them doing any of that stuff. I do think when you have all these movies going out and you don't have at least one of your big three as the character of the movie starring one of the books, it begins, and especially when you do it at the same time, and some of them feel like they're responding to the fact that Jane Foster Thor was as good as it was, and Miss Marvel is as good as it is, and Vision is as good as it is, and Miles Morales Spider-Man is as good as it is. Like, when you do all of it at once, it begins to feel like you're trying to capture lightning in a bottle that only came about because you had a writer and artist team come in and say, we want to do this. And maybe there were writer and artist teams that came in and said they wanted to do this, but sometimes it feels like it was more like an edict from the company to diversify, and you forcibly diversify rather than organically diversify by hiring writers and artists of color or of different sexualities and genders and all of these different things that you could have done to organically make it into this place that it is. And I think Marvel have been putting out some great comics the last couple of years, but I do think that they are definitely not as exciting as the movies are.
There's also the inescapable fact that at one point when one Ike Perlmutter had more sway than he does now, you know, Marvel are firing on all cylinders for their movie business. Fox own a lot of the characters. They own the X-Men. They own the Fantastic Four. He allegedly gives this edict, kill them. If we can't get the movie rights, fucking destroy the fan base for them, take away all demand and we'll get them back. And they sort of can Fantastic Four in comics. X-Men it didn't ever go away. You can't get rid of X-Men. Well, you'd think you couldn't get rid of Fantastic Four, but it definitely takes a back seat. It goes through a lot of changes, and they try this Inhumans experiment, which doesn't work out in comics and definitely doesn't work out on television. You know, one of their rare...
It definitely didn't work out in movies as well.
Well, yeah, exactly. There was going to be an Inhumans movie. At one point, Vin Diesel was rumoured for Black Bolt.
I mean, I just remember, like, Kevin Feige announced it, and then they just stopped talking about it. Like, on no promotion for it whatsoever, no mention of it, no nothing. And you could tell that he was annoyed whenever it came up in conversation. You can tell it was something that was forced onto him by someone else. And I genuinely think that there is a good story that you could tell with the Inhumans based on that Paul Jenkins Jay Lee run from the early 2000s, that you could tell with the Raw family of the Inhumans. Don't try the bullshit Game of Thrones dueling families thing that they tried to force down our necks in the comic books when, like, the Raw family are interesting because they're a bunch of weird inbred people kind of interacting with each other. But like this, the behind the scenes stuff going on there, where like Jonathan Hickman could have written a great Inhumans book, but he had no interest in doing that. He set it up in Infinity and then run off. Matt Fraction was probably going to do something a lot weirder than what they ultimately ended up doing, but they pissed him off so much he left the company. Like,
R.I.P. Hawkeye.
But it's just okay. This is a completely different debate. Inhumans was a bad idea for Marvel Comics to start doing, and the only good thing that's come out of it is Miss Marvel.
I mean, as a tangent.
Oh, and Black Bolt. Black Bolt as well. The series is really fucking good.
I've heard this. As another tangent, Inhumans, the TV series, one and a few missteps. We have exclusively on this podcast talked about the movies. In an ideal world, I think we would cover a lot of the TV as well. The Netflix verse has done pretty well for them, I feel, in terms of buzz. Like Netflix don't release numbers. There's no direct correlation with like money, but Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage, certainly very talked about, very well received. People are interested in these very different styles of characters, and they are growing that, where they're adding new shows and they're getting sequel seasons, and there's all this speculation about, what are you going to do next? Are you going to do Blade? Are you going to do Moon Knight? All this. So that, I think, is working. Obviously, Iron Fist, I've come to the defense of Iron Fist, but I will never try and tell you it's really, really good. But then Inhumans was a massive misfire. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I feel, that's a pretty popular show, right? Like it's on the biggest network of all of them. I would be surprised if it wasn't the most watched of all of them, even on a passive level. Like, I feel like Jessica Jones and Daredevil probably inspire more passion, but then that's also by benefit of being on Netflix and people watch whatever the fuck Netflix puts on. Hey now, Daredevil and Jessica Jones are good.
Daredevil, Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are all good. I won't disagree there, but I do think that Iron Fist and Defenders and...
Yeah, Defenders, their attempt at doing what they've done with Avengers, it's the same blueprint. Here are 4 individual things leading to one team-up thing. Didn't work out. I mean, like that. The issue there is that they didn't hire the right people to write it. It didn't have as much money behind it as the Avengers did. Netflix didn't suddenly go, we're combining the budget of all 4 series into one mega series, and we're going to get, like, oh god, who's a good TV director who could, like Neil Marshall's going to come in and, like, direct all 8 episodes, and it's going to be fucking epic. No, it was just, hey, here's 8 episodes of a show where they cross over, and it feels like they probably could have done it in 6. Which is, like, that's the big problem with the TV side, is that everything is about like 2 or 3 episodes too long. And I've tapped out at this point, really. Like, I probably will end up watching Punisher and Jessica Jones season 2 at some point, but I am hard out on Netflix for the most part, and it's going to take a while for me to like build up the end. Like, because I watched Iron Fist season 1 and Luke Cage season 1 in the run up to Defenders, and that almost killed me. Yeah, I mean, I binged Daredevil. And I think I binged Jessica Jones. I've tried to spread all the others out a bit more. I don't envy... Well, actually, I think I binged all of them just before... I wrote a series of articles to like catch people up for Defenders. But, you watching those as a crash course for Defenders probably was not a smart move. But I don't know, I like these characters. You watch every goddamn TV show under the sun, but I don't watch a lot of currently airing things. And obviously Marvel is in my wheelhouse anyway. Like, all these movies, I'm so invested. And they do seed in a lot more tie-ins than you might think.
But it is very one-sided. Like, at no point does anyone say, "Oh, did you hear about that incident that happened in Harlem?" And then you get like, "Oh, it's a Luke Cage reference." Instead, it's just like, "Oh, we live in the city that was the incident happened in."
Obviously, the TV side need them more than the other way around. But I don't know. I like that there is an ongoing thing involving characters that I care about. And I think this is another thing. Like, I heard Chadwick Boseman compare these characters, like, saying that they're mythic, and I've heard the term, comic books are the new Greek gods. I've heard that said, where, these are massive sort of pop culture icons at this point, and I don't think superhero movie I don't think it's a genre anymore. Like, I really don't. And it goes back to this fad thing that I don't think was ever true, and this bubble thing. They are just massive cultural icons. They have like 20 James Bonds in some ways. And I don't know, I just think generally that's why I like the Netflix side of it, even when some of them aren't as good as they could be. I like just having these ongoing adventures with all these characters I like, and I like that it can cross over and reward my repeated viewing. Okay, so I feel we could probably talk about the MCU forever and ever and ever. And we have been talking about it seemingly forever and ever. And over the course of that, we have been cultivating this fun list that we have been calling the All Marvel list, wherein every movie we nominate an actor who we feel is giving one of the best performances in the MCU. If no one is any good, we keep a pick. If a performance comes up repeatedly, they compare against, and if the new one is better, the old one is out, and so on and so forth. And we have cultivated this list across 18 movies, and we have come to the conclusion of Sam Rockwell, Hayley Atwell, Tom Hiddleston, Mark Ruffalo, Scarlett Johansson, Ben Kingsley, Samuel L. Jackson, a five-way tie between the Guardians of the Galaxy because we're cowards, Michael Pena, Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Michael Rooker, Tom Holland, Michael Keaton, Tessa Thompson, Letitia Wright, Denai Guerrera, and Michael B. Jordan. That's 18. We like round numbers here, so we want to take it to 20, and the way
I should point out, if you haven't been listening, this is your first podcast, we didn't think that Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans were bad in all the previous movies.
No, that's the point. Yeah, this is the point. Like, they obviously got in originally on Iron Man 1 and The Winter Soldier, but we just feel that the emotion and the level of, like, dramatic acting happening and in Civil War, and we kind of like the idea of them both getting it together for that.
Yeah, it's just like when you summarize it out, it's just like, oh yeah, Sam Rockwell really is the first person that we thought gave a good performance in these movies.
Suppose, I mean, the list as it originally was, yeah, Robert Downey Jr. was obviously the first person on it, and he seemed like he was going to stay there forever. I was tentative about saying, I think he might be better in Civil War, and I was elated when you went with me on that journey. So we have these 18 people. We thought it would be fun to take it to 20 by each taking an uncontested pick. Because some of these we've had to fight a little bit on, some of them we've sort of come to a nice agreement. There's been some tactical, like, I've got to save a pick to get someone I want later. So if there's anyone that we feel got snubbed that we want to bring back, just sort of, we feel also belongs on this list, this is the time. And whoever you say, they're on the list. Whoever I say, they're on the list. Except you cannot say Kevin Feige, we have agreed.
Ugh.
So
disagree with this.
Okay.
He's done more for the MCU than anyone else we could possibly mention.
I thought you were going to go with his performance in just lying about their future plans only to reveal them has been great. Would you like to pick first or second?
I'll go second.
Okay, well then, I'm going to say Chris Hemsworth for Thor Ragnarok. In some ways it would be really nice if we had all the key Avengers in here. And maybe
don't twist my arm.
No. That's not the basis of my argument. But I was just thinking, Downey's in here and Evans is in here, and I just think Hemsworth has, obviously you watch Thor 1 and you wouldn't put that on the list, and Thor 2 he's far more confident. Avengers he's far more confident, but it's still not quite there. Like the material isn't great, but he's a charismatic guy that like everyone likes. He's one of the more popular actors who's involved, and being gorgeous and funny helps with that. But it was when I was editing our Thor Ragnarok episode and I was hearing it all back and I was like, you know what, he is really good in this. Like the comedy's really good. He is completely at calm with that character, and they take it in a completely new direction and they unleash who Chris Hemsworth actually is as a performer. And I feel his greatest strength is in his comedy. Not to say he isn't good at drama, but I think that is where his strength lies, and I feel that is a massive win for him. And it's not that Tessa Thompson comes in and just like leaves him in the dust. I mean, she's better than him, but
she's better than everyone.
She is better than everyone. But I feel it is a really good, confident performance, and I kind of want to give him some love, and I feel he's missing from the list. So for me, Chris Hemsworth would be the 19th pick, leaving you with a completely wide open lane to bring in anyone you want.
This has been the toughest decision I've had, because I feel like everyone I really love, we've mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason Hemsworth is 19th and not like I didn't fight for him before now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who I think give good performances, but maybe they're not in it enough, maybe. So, I mean, I think Stanley Tucci is the best mentor character that we had. Like, he's better than Yinsen in Iron Man. He's better than Forrest Whitaker in Black Panther. Like,
Black Panther himself, Chadwick Boseman. You've got Andy Serkis as Ulysses Klaue.
Andy Serkis is great. Winston Duke is really good in Black Panther, but we've already got 3 actors from that.
You've got Corey Stoll from Ant-Man.
I mean, I could even take one of your picks and or like what you discussed and say James Spader, because James Spader is good, even if I don't think the character of Ultron works.
That was my argument in the episode. It's not about we included Ben Kingsley because I included Ben Kingsley because I think it was great that he was doing both, that he was giving this really sinister, dramatic performance, and then he was also bringing the house down, in my opinion, with the comedy. So for me, it was all about the acting. I personally like what they did with the character as well within the script, but for me, this list is about acting, and for whatever you feel about the creative direction of Ultron, I feel that James Spader's vocal performance is top-notch, but I got fought down from that hill, and I've now come around to Hemsworth, so that was always my argument. In a world where we're not tied to one individual movie, I think Paul Bettany deserves some love because he's always been there as Jarvis, and then I think in his 9 minutes or less as Vision in Age of Ultron, I think he's actually really good there as well. But I feel we do need to stick to one movie only for these, so I don't think you could put him in just on those 9 minutes. Unless you feel really strongly about one of the Jarvis performances.
I'm going to go Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, all the Avengers together.
But I don't know.
Civil War or Ultron?
I can't nail it down to one movie. I just think he's been getting slowly better.
I prefer him in Civil War.
I think he's good in Civil War. I think he's good in Age of Ultron. I think he's fine in the Avengers. I think he's just someone who...
I like no fucks given Hawkeye.
He's someone who's been so unfairly shit upon. And, like, Joss obviously apologised to him in a big way. And part of the reason I'm picking him now is because we exist in this period of time where we have no fucking clue what's going on in Infinity War. And he's in no promotional artwork. He's in no trailer. Jeremy Renner's having to do guerrilla advertising for it. And people are making fake posters that have replaced every character with Hawkeye. And I don't think they're going to fuck him over as badly as we think they are. I think partly him in Age of Ultron is he's really good. He got some of the biggest laughs out of me in Age of Ultron, and he gets the family emotional arc. You get the whole like building up to be dead, and I don't think he's the Hawkeye that I want, but I think he's the Hawkeye that the MCU needs, and I think that's why I'm putting him on the list. Is because no matter what happens, I think he does represent something, and I think his point of view and what he brings to the movies, even if he's obviously the weakest of the original six, but he does bring something. And, I mean, I can't remember which movie it is where they say, like, they need you.
Age of Ultron. The wife says it to him on the farm.
I do agree with that.
He says that, that they don't need him, and she says, no, I think it's scarier. I think it's that they do.
Yeah, I think
and his little speech to Scarlet Witch at the end about why he's doing this and all that, I think that is really, really well delivered. And then him pretending to shoot Pietro, and as funny as I think he is in Civil War with, playing 18 holes and he was done in 18 shots, of showing up haphazardly to try and take on Vision, I think that's all funny, but it's also like, he's not in that movie very much, whereas Ultron, you're getting a far more rounded performance.
I think he's good. I don't think we're done. I think I'm going to come away, I might regret this in 7 days' time when I've come out of Infinity War, but right now I do think that I would feel bad if Jeremy Renner didn't get onto this list.
Well, isn't this cute now that we have all the core Avengers from that first movie on this list? So there you go then. We finally completed the all-Marvel list. We have 20 MCU performances. By the time you hear this, Josh Brolin may have just blown everyone away as Thanos or someone else. But this podcast was always intended to be a journey to Infinity War, not really incorporating it as part of the... Like, we're not going to give it the same process we give these others. It's just going to be a much more raw reaction. So I feel all these lists are not including it. And we'll build a new one in several years' time when we've got a new set. Maybe we'll go up to 25, maybe we'll go up to 30, who knows. But that is our all-Marvel list. I feel the bizarro version of the all-Marvel list, Marvel have worked with a lot of actors who are very, very good, and they didn't serve them very well. And they, in a perfect world, they would be on the all-Marvel list because they're certainly good enough to be there. But Idris Elba comes to mind in that, one of the most in-demand actors in the world, huge name, beloved, in a whole bunch of Marvel movies, ain't done shit, hates it, wants out. There's going to be a theme here. Rene Russo, Christopher Eccleston, Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje, all wasted from Thor. Lee Pace, famously bad villain from Guardians. Jimon Honsu, famously bad villain. Not bad, just in it for about 3 minutes and hearing the backstory with like how he wanted his son to have this positive black role model.
Yeah,
This
go
superhero.
go watch Guardians of the Galaxy, and then chase it up with Blood Diamond, and then just wonder what the fuck happened
Yup.
to Jimon Honsu.
We've joked about Corey Stoll in Ant-Man, like he's a perfectly fine actor, and like he's better than that, and that's probably a lot of people's first exposure to him, and they probably now are like, oh, he's bad. So I feel bad for him. Judy Greer, criminally underused in Ant-Man. Hope she's in Ant-Man and the Wasp a lot more. Michael Stuhlbarg. My word, how you get that down to just annoying dick who's in it for a minute and a half. I don't know. The man was in, 3 Oscar-nominated movies last year?
Yeah, he was in 3 Oscar... just saying that blows my mind.
Yeah.
And then I do want to step out the last one for Rebecca Hall, because I think Mads actually does a decent job.
Yeah, I feel just people wanted Mads to be this really... Because he was teased for so long as being in the MCU, and they want him to have this really substantial recurring role, and he may come back. He's not.
Yeah,
dead.
I just think Rebecca Hall being fucked over in Iron Man 3 is.
Rebecca Hall got fucked so badly.
So
she was meant to be the villain of that goddamn movie, the one who's pulling everyone's strings. Like she created this Mandarin character to speak to masculine testosterone, fears of terrorism, all of this, and it's actually just this really intelligent woman who's just playing everyone. That would have been great, and I'm really sorry that she didn't get to play the character that she signed up for. Yeah, there's a lot of possible nominations here, but I think those are potentially the 10 most wasted ones. I mean, Michael K. Williams, he's standing on the side of a street because...
I think functionally that's a cameo.
Exactly.
That was in 2008. The Wire had only just finished. I don't think he's from a well-regarded HBO TV show that's watched by 1 million people. I don't think at that point it's a waste of it.
A lot of people are there designed to be in a cameo. So, you can say Matt Damon, but I mean, he was only ever going to be in it to appear like something like this. So there are a lot of actors who are better than what we've seen from them. Some of them have a legacy of being good, but then when they were in Marvel they were just bad. Yeah, and some of them they weren't a big enough name yet for it to be considered. Like Richard Armitage, I don't think was really anyone. Natalie Dormer, I don't think was anyone. Jenna Coleman, I don't think was anyone.
She literally was no one.
Exactly. So
you also might have noticed that quite a lot of those are villains.
This is true. There's also, I think, quite a disproportionate number of women. I mean, our top 10 is mostly men, but if you look at all the actors that were kind of maybe misused, there are a lot of women on there as you dig a little bit deeper, but that's a bummer to end on. That is kind of the conclusion of this journey, and we wanted originally to release our review of Infinity War on the 10-year anniversary of the MCU. Instead, you have this, our general discussion. Coming next will be our review of Avengers Infinity War, which is, 1 week after its release. We would have loved to have been up for day one, but Marvel moved things around, and then I decided I was going to be out of the country, so this is as it is. I'm happy we've done this, though, because it brings us to a nice round 20 episodes. So episode 20, next up, will be our review of Avengers Infinity War. Thank you, and here's to another 10 years of the MCU.